Horace Silver, one of the all-time greats of modern jazz. This is probably his most famous song, Song for My Father. You may recognize the intro. It was lifted from Horace Silver's hit many years later.
By Steely Dan.
Steely Dan. Same introduction for Ricky, Don't Lose That Number.
Hello viewers, it's James Kalm, your half-assed report of the guy on the bike. And we're on Forsyth Street. We're gonna go in and take a look at a two-person show. And we're gonna have a little discussion. Special shout out to our viewers in Glasgow, Copenhagen, and San Diego. We're gonna slip into the Stephen Harvey Fine Art Project, and we're going to take a look at a two-person show titled No Nature, featuring the work of Gandy Brody and Peter Acheson. We're going to try to snag Peter Acheson here and get him to talk a little bit about Hey, Peter.
Hey, everyone.
Come on in. I'm good. What's James Kalm, please? Thank you.
James Kalm.
Yeah. I guess I should start this off and say we were just chatting a little bit in the back before this, and we actually had a discussion here in 2013, was that?
Yeah,
so that's almost 9 years ago. So we're going to continue that. Let's go down here and start out looking at some of your work. This is all stuff that's been from the last year, 2 years, 5 years?
No,
what does it
this
cover?
was curated out of probably 10 years.
10 years. Okay. So it's not stuff that's just been done during the lockdown. This is going back a while.
It goes back a while. Steve curated it just piece by piece. No thought of date, body of work, grouping, anything. Just individual artworks.
And it's a two-person show, so it's kind of maybe the work relates to this other artist here we're going to talk about a little later, Gandy Brody, maybe?
Correct.
Okay.
As long as I've painted, people have always linked me with Gandy, mainly I think because of the smallish size and the intimacy of the paint surface. And so this is really kind of an honor for me because I've always admired Gandy.
Well, he's one of those kind of unknown masters in a certain way, that if you're a serious paint head, you know about him, but if you're not, you probably have never heard of him. Let's start looking at this piece. You have, I'm going to give you the title question thing, see if you can remember all these. Do you have a title for this one?
No, I think generally these first two are untitled.
That's always the good way to slip out of that.
Grab the list here. Maybe it says. This one is untitled, 2021.
So this is some of the recent work.
This is recent. These three are from 2020 and 2021.
Okay, let's look at this piece. So is that canvas boards that you're nailing onto stretcher bars? Is that what that is?
Canvas board nailed onto a stretcher bar, exactly. This is acrylic, that's oil, that's oil.
Do you, when you're painting, do you consciously decide, I'm going to paint this in acrylic because there's something about the way acrylic paint handles it differently, or it's just something is there on the table and you grab it and start working with whatever is at hand?
No, I think I really am conscious of the difference between oil and acrylic, mainly in the way they reflect light in their own different ways. The acrylic is much more matter of fact and satisfies a kind of matter of fact, just do it, it is what it is sort of tendency in my work. Whereas the oil
takes a little more time and
takes a little more time. It reflects light a little more deeply and a little more tonal.
Let me ask you about the glyphs here. This looks like text. It almost looks like Arabic writing. Is there some kind of something you're dealing there with, maybe the idea of text, or is that's just a compositional thing that you're working on and it doesn't really relate to that? Or
no,
how do you think about that?
Absolutely has to do with text. As you know, I used to often write English text words or titles or thoughts, kind of poetic thoughts into the painting itself. This was a way, but what I really liked about that was the shape of the letters as abstract sort of symbols. This came out of a book that I received in the mail that had English translations of Hafez next to the Persian original text.
Okay.
And I noticed that the graphics of the Persian were really very satisfying.
Does this have a title?
This is called Rock Study. It's a.
So is this actually a real study? I mean, you went out in plein air and did
No, it wasn't plein air. I took photographs of the rocks on the Taconic Parkway and began kind of roughly sketching them with they're really intriguing to me because they struck me as full of imagery and full of interesting movement, very much like abstract painting. And so to do a painting of a rock face, which is already an abstract painting,
makes it doubly abstract.
Makes it doubly
and then
abstract.
Trying to do it realistically throws another wrench into the works. Let's look at some of the stuff on the other side here. You were talking about the fact that people have kind of paired you with Gandy Brody because of the scale of the work, the intimacy of the work. Something like this, although it is a little longer, it's still kind of in the, I guess what you would call the intimate scale, the smaller size things. What are your thoughts about that? Because I know, and I guess we've got a painting down there that's a little bit larger. Have you been getting maybe smaller or changing or thinking about scale as far as your practice goes a lot?
Not really. I've been pretty consistent working on the scale. The intimacy is the key word. I'm extremely interested in drawing the viewer's interest up to the painting rather than allowing them to stand back too far and be impressed or not impressed. But my goal is to draw the viewer's interest in so that we're standing about this far from this, and it has to maintain its interest.
So in that way, it's almost more like, say, holding a book or something like that, where you kind of have a real personal relationship with it, and you can hold it close enough that you can still take in the whole thing, but yet still feel like you're
I think that's
almost
a good analogy,
part
holding a book.
face to face with the painting.
Well, it's also the way I tend to look at scenes, landscapes, people, objects in the real world, which is to get really interested in a scale like this and want to come up and really examine it close up. So it's more like a method of kind of reflecting the way I like to look.
Okay, let's slide down the line a little bit. Another intimate painting. And this is, what, maybe 8 by 10 inches, something like that?
I think it is. I think that is exactly what that is. This is called Interior. It's, again, kind of satisfying a perverse notion in me to be, to flip between being utterly generically feet first in modernism, and then also be as exact and as specific as I can be with the actual painting. And maybe it's an attitude about history, being open to going back into history and feeling like I've always wanted to make a Matisse, or I've always wanted to make that little Picasso, something on the scale. Again, what satisfies me would be just the way that I'm drawn up to this. And this painting actually came to life over a number of years. It's had a couple of different
Reincarnations.
but I worked on it about 6 months ago, and it ended up being this.
All right, let's go look at this piece. Is this the oldest piece in the show?
I think it is. This is from 2008.
2008.
This is what I was doing in 2008. I tend to find certain kind of language structures with the paint that intrigue me in terms of their relationship to natural phenomenon. And then I'll just run with it, with line, color, and form, and explore it as much as I can. And so in 2008, I was making a number of paintings with this format, painting with the side of a chip brush, 4-inch, 3-inch, 2-inch, 1-inch, half-inch.
So there's almost kind of a performative thing in there as well as just the painting stuff. You're kind of conceptually thinking about how I'm going to put the marks down, what tools I'm going to use, things beyond just composition and line and color.
Well, the funny thing about the chip brush technique was that even though most of these marks were made going across the canvas, when they line up and you get these vertical movements coming straight down, that was like an organic form of grid that really interested me. And it made me think that I was finally kind of channeling the sort of geometry of decay that one finds in downed trees in the woods or rotten logs.
Okay.
In that general kind of area in nature where decay and creation are kind of flip sides of the same coin.
Okay, let's slip into the back and take a look at some more of the pieces here. You were talking about working on some of the smaller pieces, but working on them over periods of years. So how long would you work on one of these?
This one is an example of it. This one is worked on over the course of maybe 3 or 4 years. The canvas kept coming back, needing more work, needing editing out, needing adding to, and finally ended up with this. And oddly enough, unbeknownst to me, Steve reminded me that it really mirrors a bunch of Gandy Brody paintings of tree trunks, roughly diagonal tree trunks in the woods, which is what I like about that painting. It's a very woodland kind of light, duskish.
I like this piece, and this also here you've got some of your text. You've also mentioned the fact that I think I've seen it on Facebook, that artists like Julian Schnabel were very important for you. And I think that there was a period where Julian was doing a lot of text, or maybe there would be a couple of words, like you're saying, talking about a little poetry. There would be a couple of things that would be kind of spewed out onto the canvas, not that different from the way that he might throw a paint stroke on there or something like that.
Absolutely. I learned a lot from those particular Schnabels. In fact, he's one of my favorite artists for just the inclusiveness of, the written text, the word, the shape of the letter, the gesture. And in a way, this could be a small version of that. But
okay. Well, and what is this technique you're doing? Kind of some kind of mushing surfaces together and getting various kinds of strange things to appear?
This is basically monotyping.
Monotyping, yes.
Monotyping with acrylic paint using a foam core scored with a nail or a palette knife or a pencil, and then just really quickly rolling paint on it and doing a quick hand monotype. Which is astonishing because when I did this painting, it just, to me, it's almost a photorealist painting of the woods, which, how that happens.
You know, you're right. If you kind of blur your eyes a little bit, it does look like you've got the tree trunk sort of maybe looking out onto a snow field or something like that through some branches and things. Okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to bring out Mr. Steve Harvey, and we're going to let him talk to us a little bit about Gandy Brody and maybe some of the ideas about the show. Stephen Harvey, you're the guy that came up with the idea of the show, and I know that you've been working with the estate of Gandy Brody for how long? It's many years. Okay, well, we'll start out taking a look at this piece.
This is, Lauren, this is a kind of fantastic painting. This is one of my raison d'etres for doing the show, was to show this painting, which I had never shown before. And it's called Stalagmites and Lichen.
Stalagmites, stalactites, and lichen? Or is it stalagmite?
Great question.
Okay.
It's from the end of Gandy's life. He died in around 1975 at the age of 50.
50?
He dropped dead of a heart attack.
Gosh.
In New York while he was living in both Vermont and New York. And somehow living in living in Vermont had brought out this impulse to paint nature in him. So like what Peter was just discussing, he made these primal images of trees where it's just a trunk crossing the rectangle. And it's a very abstracted form of nature. And this, I think, is like a penultimate example of that, in the sense that you see this thing, there's not really any obvious relationship to what it is. It kind of looks like a rock or a tree stump with a lot of pock marks and ears and stuff in it.
And this is all oil paint, right?
You know, that's a great mystery, Lauren. I just don't know what's in it. I mean, I look at it and I somehow feel like he just used oil paint.
Yes. You know, it's ironic to note that I actually bumped into Peter maybe a month ago, and we were over about 2 blocks away from here looking at a John Lee show.
Who gets a similar surface.
John Lee is someone who does get this kind of surface, you know, works on the paintings for 20, 25, 30 years. But Gandy was doing all this years before I think even John Lee started his career. So you were saying this is maybe in the early 70s?
Yeah, I'd
Something
say
like that?
mid-70s. And obviously there was some time in this painting because there was another painting that's buried underneath it. And I can't tell you, I mean, we looked at this painting, which is slightly similar in a certain way.
Okay.
It's called I Am a Tree. And it has that primal relationship to nature.
Right.
But underneath it is a self-portrait. And I can't quite tell what's in this one. But I love the accretion of matter in it. You know, I mean, that's the thing that I like.
Okay, let's go down and look at some of the other work here. Actually, we should look at this piece. Okay, I am familiar with the work of Gandy Brody, and I have been familiar with his work probably since maybe the early 80s. But I have never seen any of his work that looked like this. There was a figure. I mean, maybe they would have something, but this is very blatantly a figurative painting, fairly large.
No, he painted figures. There are a bunch of paintings of figures. I mean, for instance, in the summer, when we returned from the first time, the return from COVID, we had a show called Dark Was the Night, and we had...
That's right, I covered that show.
A big painting of John Coltrane that he did. Playing the saxophone. And there are other paintings. There are paintings of his family, but what there aren't is a lot of nudes. And I think I've seen one other painting of Gandy's that's a nude, and this appears to me to be his wife Jocelyn Brody, who I knew,
And just passed away recently, is that?
Well, 10 years ago, maybe.
Okay, 10 years ago.
And, but this is in 1960, and Gandy and Jocelyn were set up to meet by Meyer Shapiro, the art historian.
Who was one of his champions, right? Didn't he sort of show up on Meyer's doorstep one day and handed him a bunch of paintings and said, I'm an artist? And Meyer was so impressed that he started curating them into shows and writing about them. And
Well, he definitely wrote about him. He definitely liked Gandy's work. And so what he did was send Gandy to, when he was in Florence, he said you should meet Jocelyn, forget her maiden name, and she was a Thomas Mann scholar and also a painter. And Gandy went to see her, and they basically fell in love and stayed together for the rest of his life, and were married and had a son. And anyway, this is a nude, and I think again, the raison d'etre for me of this show, in one way, was to show this painting, because it comes from a wonderful woman's collection. She's a psychiatrist who was a friend of Gandy, and is an elder now, and she's about to move out of her apartment. She's a big apartment with a lot of paintings in it, and I just adore this painting, and I wanted to see what it would look like in daylight, like we have it here, with good lighting on it.
so this is what, approximately
1960.
1960, but it's about maybe 7.5 feet by,
It's 83 inches,
okay,
and
by 4.5 feet wide, something
yeah,
like
something
that.
like that.
And Gandy didn't make a lot of large paintings like that, did he?
He made a number of big paintings.
Did he?
Oh yeah, he's got some
Okay,
extraordinary ones.
okay.
The last time we had a Gandy show here, we showed.
I did. I remember seeing that you had a couple of them, like power lines or
Yeah, we had
something like
We had the bridge paintings.
the bridge. That's right. But most of the stuff that I've seen was from the later period.
So this is City Anguish, it's called.
Okay.
And that's, speaking of Terry Winters, a great
Yes.
proto Terry Winters.
Okay. Yeah. Here's
From
one of his.
1958.
Here's one of his drawings.
Now this is also very early. This is from the 50s, late 50s, and it's a Florentine wall and trees with the moon, obviously, and it's done in the 50s when he was here going to meet.
And is this gouache and watercolor?
Great question. It says gouache. I think I've written this gouache, but it's clear there's some drawing in charcoal or something, or chalk on it, So I'm sure it has a little mixed media.
Let's go look at some of the stuff in the back room.
Sure. Well, this is
I actually like this piece. This little.
what that
Okay.
is, painting on paper, and the paintings of flowers were the one group of work that Gandy could almost invariably sell during his lifetime.
People are still selling flowers. I think in the last 6 months I've gone to 3 or 4 shows that were just flowers, and I think
So-
the Julian Schnabel show that I didn't make it to this afternoon is flowers.
Right, exactly. This is a painting on paper, and it was restored and saved by the estate because it was in like a little bit funky shape. A bouquet
24 by 18.
in a Martinson's coffee can, which was kind of characteristic of Gandy's still lives of flowers. So it was in rusty old cans.
Well, the thing I like about this is that it's aqueous medium. That is, it's like watercolor or gouache or whatever, and pen and ink and maybe some drawing stuff in there. But even so, he's still building up layers and layers and layers of the gouache and the tempera and the watercolor and sort of mixing it all together, and it somehow gives the image almost a physical presence somehow. Okay, we were also
I
looking.
couldn't have said, I can't add anything to that. That's exactly right from my perspective.
You were talking about
this
this one is from the mid
Yeah, this is
50s.
57. This is
1957.
Intrusion of Light from 1957. And it looks like a still life of a small rose. And
Right, and a little glass on a table.
exactly. And he made another painting that I've seen of a similar kind of single rose in a kind of glassy box like that. And so I think it's related to that. But a beautiful, for me, amorphous space. He conjures up this gray cloud-like space with the rose in it, and of course the light hitting the rose so nicely.
Okay, there's a great Peter
And
painting.
here's
right there.
Acheson doing his remarkable moon for cat power
All right, don't fuck with cats, as they say.
Well, I mean, did you know her?
No.
She used to work in this neighborhood. She worked at Todd's Coffee Shop, Cap Howard, Chan
Okay.
Marshall.
And this is Star Cluster Galaxy, something like that?
Exactly. It's a
It's a
what
Gandy
do we
painting.
call it again? Let's see.
Spiral galaxy.
Spiral Galaxy.
Yeah. A beautiful object, you know, like on a piece of plywood, thick and thickly painted.
Okay, let's look at this here as another.
Another one of his,
Is this flowers as well?
exactly. Another still like a flower saucer in a old Martinson's can. Nasturtiums, I think.
You know, one of the great things is that the sections where he's got his figures, the parts that he's concentrating on the flowers, you know, it gets lumpy and thick and kind of stands out from the base of the plane, the picture plane. And then when he's got the open spaces, that seems to get flat and really becomes a whole different textural things. Also, I think it's interesting, and this relates to what Peter is doing, are some of these pieces on
These are
wood.
These are tenement, what do you call tenements? So they're very abstract, and there's one over by the window. They're very abstracted tenement buildings.
And just things that he would find on walking around the neighborhood, drag it home, and make paintings on there.
Like a 2 by
Okay.
4.
Gonna look at this one as well.
And
Very nice little objects.
he had a desire, apparently, to do a show called 10 Tenements, where he would show documentary photographs of the tenements in the Lower East Side along with his paintings. So we tried to do a version of that here a few years ago.
Oh,
We did
okay,
a show of these
That's
tenement
great,
paintings.
that's great. You know what, we should sort of maybe continue this just as a discussion between you and I and Peter, and we can talk a little more.
Sure.
Give us another little idea about your idea for putting the show together. You had this for years, you were
We
thinking
talked
about this?
I mean, before we went on camera, which is, I think this idea has been simmering with me for 5 to 7 years, honestly, and I attribute it partially to the show that Peter organized. Like after, and you're involved because, as Peter was saying, because when you did a video report of the last show that Peter
Yes.
had in this space, that led inadvertently to Peter getting to curate with a friend of his a show about the trickster idea in art, and somehow I attached that idea to Gandy as well as Peter. I mean, Peter is a conscious claimant of this thought, you know, this idea for artists having a persona as a trickster. But I think Gandy, in a sense, lived it. You know, he just was, because he was, as people described him, as kind of a hustler. But I don't think that's a really accurate description, even though I didn't.
Did
know
you ever meet him, or?
No, I never met him. I only knew
Okay.
his wife. I did not know him. And, this idea of being like, he's inventing a persona that is servicing your needs in a sense, somewhat magically, in other words, like creating a persona.
Well, why don't you, Peter, explain a little bit about your idea of the trickster, and, you know, because you've thought about this and probably are pretty damn tricky yourself, right?
Well, let's just say that I think where I overlap with Gandy in a sense is that I'm interested in the materiality of painting for sure, and Gandy has that in spades. I also feel there's a conceptual dimension to my work, and I get inspired by that from Gandy, which I take it as a type of cultural critique.
Yes.
At a moment in American painting history when things were getting bigger and bigger and bigger and minimaler and more minimal. And that was the kind of avant-garde image that he went completely in the opposite direction, even to the degree that he moved up to Vermont and had the ambition to start a painting school. And
Not so different than you. You kind of moved out of the scene yourself.
I moved out of the scene into the countryside, and I feel that to insist on intimacy, touch, and a rather introverted kind of quest for, what do you call it, meaning, the soul, the
Profundity,
self,
right.
that we're like that way. And he was a hero of mine, as well as was Jan Mueller and Robert De Niro Sr., so I put him in that group. There is a dimension of cultural critique to his work that I think is still relevant today. And the paintings that Steve has on the wall are speaking to me from that point of view. There's still a place for intimacy, for flowers, for poetry, for sensitivity, and a non-exclusive emphasis on the professional.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking is there's room for all that stuff, but it's not easy. It's not quick. It's not something that you can push a button and it pops out of your computer. This is something you have to work at. And part of I think the qualities of Gandy's work and a lot of your work is that, you were talking about the paintings change. Maybe you start out with an idea and it's like, well, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. You put it aside, pull it out 6 months later, work on it some more. Maybe it still doesn't work. You put it away and years go by and you're still futzing around. But eventually, maybe, you get something to happen, but it's not easy.
Well, also the thing that it reminds me of, and I'd put myself squarely in this camp and Gandy squarely in this camp, I think that there's a terrific tradition in American art of what I call the ambitious amateur. And I would include in that Albert Ryder, Louis Alchemius, even somebody like Thomas Edison. The idea of inventing the light bulb in your garage, Mark Rothko painting in a garage in Long Island one summer, the ambition to sort of change art history, but you're doing it in your living room. It's a terrific tradition. Forrest Bess is in there, and I've put Gandy in there, and I would put myself in there. So the ambitious amateur as opposed to the professional. And it's not an either-or situation, but that's a little bit related to the trickster. The idea that, I can make a painting on my kitchen table and it's going to, have meaning and have impact and be culturally significant. I think that's rather a tricksterish idea.
It is not only that, but I think it's in certain ways it's a good idea. We were talking about the intimacy of scale, and one of your good, probably oldest friends, Chris Martin, is an example of someone that works big. I mean, I think he had a show at the Cochrane called Painting Big or something like that. And they had paintings in the show that were, 20 feet tall, something like that, 20, 50. And I think maybe you go to a studio out in Williamsburg, and like his standard painting is something like 12 by 15 feet. But I keep thinking to myself, especially with a lot of the concerns today about sustainability and all that stuff, it's not only one thing to make the painting that's 10 by 15 or whatever feet, then you have to store it. Every time it gets shipped, it has to be crated, and so there's a lot of excess material that goes into maintaining all that stuff. But it goes to what you're talking about being the professional, sort of doing what the standard people expect you to do. The market expects this. I'm not going to invest in something if it's not this and this. But on the other hand, how big does a painting have to be to have meaning? In certain ways, it's more sustainable to work in a smaller scale. And it also goes to the part about you moving out of town and going up the Hudson. There's this long tradition of the Hudson River School, and there's also kind of a spiritualism of the Hudson Valley, and I think that there are probably, you could go back and find a lot of old tales and stories about some of the kind of natural myths of this area. And so I think that's all part of the kind of the heritage of getting out of the city and getting away from the establishment in a certain way.
You're right. The Hudson River, as Peter Lamborn Wilson has pointed out, is full of nuts. It's just got a really rich history.
It's like a bowl of granola.
Yeah, exactly. A bunch of nuts.
And the flakes are there too.
Wanted to live with Native Americans and wanted to live as nudists and wanted to have polygamy. And the towns, essentially kept fencing them out and driving them further west. But it's a terrific history of eccentrics, and I would put that into the ambitious amateur
Yes,
category.
yeah.
So I think it's a rich tradition.
I like the size issue too, because I think you get to something really good there. I was in, either down here or in Chelsea recently, and I was pondering the fact that I've been pondering for 50 years the scale of the paintings that are produced for the marketplace, like things being so ginormous. Like, you can't be a serious painter and not paint 10-foot tall paintings, as though those paintings can be absorbed into people's homes, which they really can't, except at some very high level of wealth.
Or in a corporate lobby somewhere, or the lobby of a museum or a luxury condo or something somewhere.
Underlying it is something more deep, which is that what do they call that? The snail art, the thing that has been proposed as a, kind of anti-gigantism mode, is an important political thing, and it's...
Right, Manny Farber wrote Elephant Art versus Termite Art.
Right.
And I
Yes.
myself proudly on the termite side of that.
and I feel like when I started my gallery, it was a big part of what interested me, that there were people making small paintings, not because they were small, because that's what they saw, and that's how they, that's how they felt. And I've seen it through my whole life. That's the people I've known who've made small paintings and made them truly beautiful. And I think it's a part of this gallery, though. I do like to try and blow that up as much as possible and show big paintings here. But, I think it's a welcome antidote to a generally perceived, reality.
Yes, no, I agree. And the other thing is that doesn't mean that you never make a large painting. I mean, I tell myself, if the ideas are big, you can use a big canvas, but not every idea has to be 10 by 15 feet, and you can make wonderful paintings. Maybe some of the greatest paintings, even some of the best Picassos ever, are paintings that are about 24 by 30 or maybe even smaller than that. Anyway, gentlemen, do you have any more final statements? I think we should wrap this up.
I would just say that I think the point that Steve just made and that we've been making has to do with the difference between being interested and being impressed. And I think Steve's aesthetics, which I agree with, are heavily weighted on the side of drawing one's interest as one of the high prerequisites of this activity, rather than standing back and just being impressed by size and scale.
I'm impressed with that answer. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Steve Harvey, Peter Acheson.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Steve Harvey and Peter Acheson for chatting to us about No Nature, Gandy Brody and Peter Acheson here at the Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Project. You can like this, share, post it on all your social media sites, and you can leave your thoughts, ideas, comments, criticisms, and reviews. And remember, you can subscribe. I just ask you to say, thank you, Kate. Whoa, thank you.